Sometimes the best stories in golf aren't found on tour. You'll find them at the back of the range. And here's your host, Ben Adelberg.
And welcome to the Back of the Range Golf Podcast. I am your host, Ben Adelberg. This is episode 115. Well, the week has really flown by here at the Back of the Range. It has certainly been a productive one. I recorded two incredible episodes for later this month with two guests that probably could not be any more different. And I also spent some time catching up with some previous guests of the podcast that have become good friends. So I know that this episode is dropping a little bit late this week, but I'm not going to leave you hanging. New episode each and every week. That's what we do around here. 2020 is going to be a big year. I'll be traveling to some of the best amateur events in the country. I'll be playing some golf at some of the best courses in the world. And I want to make sure that you listeners are included every step of the way. I know that leaving reviews in Apple Podcasts takes some time. They're greatly appreciated. I know that leaving a comment takes a little bit of time, but your input will shape the future of this podcast. So if you know of a person that would be a great guest, let me know. Shoot me an email, ben@thebackoftherange.com. That's how these things happen around here. Please make sure you're subscribed in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And remember that every episode is available on the website, thebackoftherange.com. Let's get started. Our guest this week is Ryan Vermeer. He's a former two-time All-American at the University of Kansas. He holds the record for the most career wins as a Jayhawk, even more than Gary Woodland. He did play professionally on tour for several years. He reached the Kornferry Tour, but made the transition back to being a teaching professional in his home state of Nebraska. That transition led him to incredible success in the Nebraska PGA Section. In fact, he's the first Nebraska PGA member to win the PGA Professional National Championship. He did that in 2018. He's played in numerous PGA Championships and represented the PGA of America and his country in the PGA Cup. Lots of great stories, an incredible journey. Let's get started. Ryan, welcome to the Back of the Range. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
You know, the name of this podcast, Back of the Range, you've spent a lot of time on the range, whether it's working on your game or helping out your students and your members at Happy Hollow in Omaha, Nebraska. So I guess let's start at the beginning. What's your earliest memory of spending time on a driving range?
I've seen pictures of myself hitting balls, all the way back to the age of 2. Obviously, I don't recall doing that, but I do remember probably by the time I was 4 or 5, my dad was the golf professional at Spencer Golf and Country Club in Spencer, Iowa. And I mean, I definitely remember, driving carts around that place when I was way too little to do it. I remember going to the range and spending time on the putting green. Still one of my highlight shots that I don't know that I'll ever forget doing it, but there was a scoreboard that my dad had built right out in front of the putting green, and I've been back there plenty of times since, and it's obviously a fairly big scoreboard, but when you're 4 or 5 years old, it looks massive.
Of course.
And I remember sitting on the grass just by the cart path and, trying to hit a golf ball over the scoreboard onto the putting green and being able to accomplish it. That was a big deal for a 4 or 5 year old. And, it's just one of those things that I remember doing. It's, it was right out in front of the pro shop. So people that were in there could see me doing it. So it was kind of a show off thing.
Sure.
But yeah, it was fun. But I definitely remember, all the way back to, to then. I started competing in junior golf tournaments when I was 5 years old. Lots of time on the range for sure.
Well, we have lots to cover, and I guess my first question is, basically piggybacking off what you just said. Did you ever see your golf career ending, or at the part it is right now? I mean, I believe you got a birthday coming up in a couple days. I think we're right around the same age, 42, 43, as a kid that's hitting flop shots. At the age of 4 outside of his dad's shop to basically having your own shop and being the, PGA Professional of the Year. Do you have to just sit back and think, like, how did I get here?
from a pretty early age, the golf bug, hit me. I had access, that was different than most because of what my dad did. I had access to equipment. I had access to a place to go and practice. So, it was easy for me to fall in love with golf, but, that doesn't necessarily ensure that you would do it. And for me, for whatever reason, I just did. I loved golf. I loved everything about it. I'm a competitive person, so it gave me an outlet for doing that. So I would say, really, as long as I can remember, my goals were to get to somewhere similar to where I am now. Obviously, I wanted to be a PGA Tour player, and I wanted to, win the PGA Tour Player of the Year, not necessarily the PGA of America Player of the Year, but everybody has different roads to where they get in different plateaus and ceilings and whatever else. But, for where I'm at right now, to become the PGA of America Player of the Year, I mean, that's as high as an award as, I can get, because, whether I'm playing on the tour or whether I'm a section member here in Nebraska, as a PGA of America member, playing the game is still really, really important to me. So my goal is to win a Player of the Year award, which is something that you have to go out and earn, as opposed to an arbitrary award that, somebody votes on and says, oh yeah, you did a good job this year. And, so, for me to win that award, go out and compete in tournaments that mean something, that's it. That's a huge deal. But yeah, I mean, as long as I can remember, my goals were to, take playing the game of golf as far as I could take it.
Well, I am going to try and slow myself down before we get to talking about Kansas, because we definitely, as most listeners know of this podcast, I have a lot of ties to the Lawrence, Kansas area. So anytime I get to talk to a Jayhawk, I have to, I got to, practice my breathing and slow down and don't race to that part of the interview. I got to, take it one shot at a time, so to speak. So let's do a little bit of let me ask you a little bit about your junior career. So you're spending time around. You're always around a golf course. You're always around. I'm sure your dad's ran tournaments. I'm sure you're always around it. So what was your junior golf experience like? Were you playing every tournament you could play in? Were you playing other sports? What was your upbringing? And then maybe we can talk a little bit later about maybe what some of the juniors at your club are doing and how you kind of share lessons with that.
I played other sports. I was really small growing up. So, outside of maybe just shooting a basketball around, I had no business being on a basketball court.
Sure.
If I would have tried to play football, which some of my buddies did, I would have got broken in half. So that really wasn't working very well for me either. But I did play a lot of baseball growing up.
Okay.
I got to a point when I was probably in middle school where, playing on the rec league wasn't really doing it for me anymore. I felt like I was better, I was a better player than to just be playing on a rec league. So I, went down the road of trying out for the select stuff and made it all the way to the end of that process. And, the coach then popped the question to me as to how much golf I was going to play. And I gave him the answer that he didn't want to hear and told him that I was going to play in quite a few golf tournaments. So he made my decision to become a one sport athlete for me, because he was, obviously he wanted somebody on his team that was going to devote all the time to playing the baseball games.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to be that guy. So, that made it pretty easy. And I was fine with that. But, until middle school, I definitely was not just a one sport athlete. But by the time I got to middle school, golf was my thing. And as far as tournaments were concerned, I played all kinds of stuff. I played all the little things, that you could play in around Iowa and Nebraska. I started playing in, an event called the Pepsi Little Peoples in Quincy, Illinois, which I'm fairly certain still goes on today. And then they had another tournament over there as well later in the summer that was called the Junior Masters. That was kind of my big tournament of the year where I'd, go travel somewhere. Then, of course, by the time I hit, kind of that middle school age, you're starting to think a little bit bigger and, getting a little bit more exposure so that you can, get colleges to look at you. And so I started looking at the American Junior Golf Association. That association has grown, leaps and bounds since, the time that I was playing in it. There's events all over the place now. I don't think the access to it is as difficult as it was when I was growing up and playing through it. But I mean, when I was doing it, I mean, you legit had to fill out an application to get into the events.
Okay.
And, there was one event in Des Moines, Iowa that was at Wakanda. And I mean, honestly, that was the only event that was within 10 hours. I think maybe there was something out in Denver or something like that. But I mean, everything was on the East Coast and the West Coast and Arizona and stuff like that. There wasn't anything that was remotely close to, where I lived in Omaha, Nebraska. So I keep sending in these resumes and I keep getting back that you're not accepted to play. And finally, my dad calls them and, gets somebody on the phone. And he's like, well, I don't understand like exactly what criteria you need here. My son, plays good golf, does well in all these tournaments, and they come back with the response of, well, usually we try to get these players accepted on a regional basis so they can play in the events that are closest to their house. And my dad's like, well, have you ever looked at a map? Because we're trying to get him into an event that's 2.5 hours away from our house. And the next best thing is like 10 more hours away. So exactly which one are we supposed to be trying to get into here? So, I mean, that was a little bit of a frustrating thing, at first. But once I finally cracked into that deal, and played well enough, and then I think I finished pretty high in like a PGA of America junior national event at 1.2, so then you start kind of getting recognized. And then, and so I was able to enjoy, a lot of those AJGA events where, before you go play college golf, but that's kind of the pinnacle of, what you can play in. So I did all that stuff. And, my mom was my taxi driver and got me where I needed to go. And, it was a lot of fun.
It's interesting, you're talking about this, and I know you played at Kansas starting in '97, so I'm guessing this is like early and mid '90s when you're going through this. You're playing your junior golf, and obviously, there's no YouTube hype video you can make and send to anyone, and there's no. Internet, junior golf database that you can register with. So, I mean, and also, so here's a question for you. What kind of pressure did you feel to perform in these tournaments that you actually were able to get into? I mean, do you remember like some of the big sticks that you were going against, or like, what was that like? Because I'm just thinking about it like, look, normally it's you get in or you don't, but it's not like, like you had to lobby, and rightly so. You had to lobby for like your dad, or you're like, hey, I'm out here. Like, this is all I can get into. This is the closest thing to me.
Right.
Do you remember what that was like playing in that tournament?
Yeah. I mean, it was, the first few times you definitely felt the pressure to succeed, so that when you go to sign up for the next one, you could, put on the results for the, the one that you played in and not have it be one of your worst results.
Right.
And at least you wanted to be able to put it on there and not be embarrassed to do it.
Right.
So yeah, it was, there was certainly pressure there, but yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, and I'm fairly certain it was the PGA of America Junior National Championship, where, it's a deal where you qualify through a local qualifier, and then everybody goes to a national tournament. I'm pretty sure
it was the Max Fly PGA. Yeah.
Yep. So I qualified for that from Nebraska. Went down and played at PGA National in Palm Beach.
Yep.
And I played fantastic. I think I finished 10th. And you're playing against, all kinds of guys. I mean, Joel Krabel, D.A. Plum. I mean, there's all kinds of Steve Scott, there's everybody who's, done things, either back then or have continued to do things now, is playing an event. And, that was kind of my big breakthrough event. It was not an AJGA event, but I finished so high in that tournament that, basically it got me to be exempt into all these other tournaments. So that was a huge deal for me to, to perform well at that tournament. And, then, I don't know that you're trying to tell people that they need to realize that, hey, we're out here in Nebraska and we know how to play golf too. But, at the time when you're young, that's kind of the feeling that you get, that it's like, well, they don't even realize that, we're not just a bunch of cornfields. So, but yeah, it was, that was one of the frustrating things that I had to go through, but, it wasn't, something that went on for a long, long time. And it, as the old adage goes, if you just play well, things will take care of themselves. I mean, I've had, so many people tell me that over the years, and it's true. I mean, sometimes you feel like the door is closed on you, but if you get that one opportunity and you happen to perform well, that door seems to, swing open pretty wide. So, good play kind of lends to, good things happening.
Of course. So you have this, you have success in the junior side, and obviously the older you get, you're getting closer to going to college, and I'm sure that playing collegiately was something that was a goal of yours. So you, as I said, played for head coach Ross Randall at the University of Kansas from '97 to 2000, two-time All-American your junior and senior year. Won 7 events. I believe that's still a record. Talk to me a little bit about the recruiting process back then. When did Kansas come on your radar? Were there other choices?
It was interesting. I mean, and again, I think part of it is I wasn't one to, to toot my own horn. I don't remember ever sending one single thing to any coach.
Really?
I didn't send a single thing to anyone. I just kind of let it play out. And I mean, in Nebraska, we have a tournament with Kansas every year called the Kansas-Nebraska Cup matches. So the top juniors from Nebraska go down and play the top juniors from Kansas, or they come here and play. It alternates every other year. And I was able to do that. So I played in that. I think myself and maybe one kid from Kansas have both done it, but I think I played in it when I was 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. So I played in it 6 times, which I don't think anybody else has ever played in it that many times. But through that, I was able to meet a lot of the kids, from Kansas, and then obviously everybody from Nebraska. So regionally, Kansas was always, on my radar. If you follow, other sports, the hype around Kansas basketball is intriguing for anybody.
Sure.
Kansas was only 3 hours away from home. So it was, close enough that I felt like I could kind of come home if I wanted to, which I never really did, but at least it entered your mind as an 18-year-old might. But it was also far enough away that I felt like I was going somewhere. I wasn't going to go to school with all of my buddies from high school and just kind of relive, the 4 years of high school,
right.
So those were some of the factors that kind of went into it. I remember getting lots of communication from University of Minnesota, which they had a really nice golf team, back in those days. It was an honor to get that stuff, but the thought of going 5 hours north into the snow.
I have to put a sweater on just to listen to you talk about this.
Yeah, that just really didn't, I was already in a cold climate in Nebraska, and going north just didn't seem to make any sense to me whatsoever. So I kind of never really did a whole lot with that. And then, to be honest with you, I think, Nebraska kind of just knew that I wasn't interested in going there. They knew that I had some friends that were already at Kansas, and they were kind of behind the 8 ball anyway. So surprisingly, Nebraska, he did call me and tell me that if I wanted to go there, I had a scholarship, but they really didn't do much. He probably spent 10 minutes of his life trying to recruit me.
Okay.
I think he
hard sell.
Yeah,
right.
I just think that I think that he just kind of knew that I wasn't all that interested in going to Nebraska. The one program that certainly would have swayed things, at least in my mind, would have been Oklahoma State. And I did have, quite a few different meetings, not necessarily like meetings of, hey, like, come to Stillwater and, see me and, stuff like that. But I saw Coach Holder at golf tournaments all the time, and
right.
I talked to him all the time. So, there was always a little bit of communication with Oklahoma State. It never was serious enough to where, I was offered a scholarship or anything like that. But again, some of that, could be my own doing. I did, like I said, I wasn't tooting my own horn. I didn't send anything out to anybody. I just was kind of waiting to see, what would come my way. And I knew pretty early on that Kansas was interested in me and that they were going to offer me. So I made my decision pretty fast. There was a lot about Kansas that I liked. And the simple fact that I was going to a place that I wasn't going to have to redshirt, I was going to be able to play, right away, was huge for me. That was something that I talked to my dad about. I'm like, hey, I've played competitive golf, forever. I can't imagine going to school and sitting on the sidelines for a year and not competing while I just go to school and practice. I'm like, that just doesn't sound like something that I would be able to do. I don't think I could handle that.
Well, and not to cut you off, but I think that's a great, what you're saying right there is actually a great thing for parents that listen to this podcast, juniors, college players, how important it was for you to go someplace where you could play. Maybe you're not guaranteed a spot in the roster, but at least going in, hey, I'm just jumping right in and I'm going to compete to play. So go someplace where you can play.
Yeah. I mean, and so for 4 years, I played in every single tournament that the University of Kansas played in, with the exception of one. And the only reason that is because Coach Randall overscheduled us one semester. We ended up getting into a tournament that we weren't maybe expected to get into.
Okay.
We had an extra tournament, so every single one of the guys that played like on a regular basis had to pick one event to not play. Right. Otherwise, we were over the NCAA allotment of days competitive or so, whatever the rule. It was a rule. So yeah, I mean, that was that weighed pretty big on what I was going to do. I mean, I just didn't want to go and have to miss out on being able to compete. And the other part was I knew that Kansas had a good golf team, and then that we were going to be competitive. And my freshman year, we were pretty young and we weren't necessarily great, but we had promising showings when at times. By the time I was a junior, I mean, we won the Big 12 championship. Yeah. So we definitely made it to to where we were a prominent team in the country for sure.
Well, we've kind of mentioned Coach Ross Randall. He was the head coach at the University of Kansas for, probably 25, 30 years, I believe. Fortunately he passed away, but I got to know him, and I'm going to ask you the question of when you first met Coach Randall, but as I sometimes like to do, I like to tell a story that embarrasses me on my own podcast and entertains the guest and all the listeners. So this is as good a time to tell this story as any. So I spent 2 years at the University of Kansas. I played 1 year of high school golf and then spent a year going to FAU and then transferred up to Kansas. My dream school, have family up there. I basically spent every summer of my childhood out right in Lawrence, Kansas. So I got it in my 18 or 19-year-old brain of how good of an idea or how cool it would be to try and walk on to the Kansas golf team in like 96, I think it was, 90, something like that. And I found out who the head golf coach was, and it was this guy named Ross Randall. And, obviously the home course is at Alvamar. So I go and find Coach Randall, and in the parking lot, just introduce myself to him. And, of course, I don't look like a golfer because, I'm a freshman at a big school, and I discover pizza and keg parties. So I don't look like anything close to what an athlete should look like. And here I am going up to Coach Randall and saying, please, sir, explain to me the intricacies of your walk-on policy.
I'm sure that went pretty well.
And, well, he, from what I remember, he was very nice and saying, well, Ben, we kind of have a pretty good team, and, we've been pretty competitive in the Big 8 conference, which it was at that time. And, we got, I think you mentioned we got kind of a good roster right now. We kind of have some incoming freshmen coming in that are pretty strong. And I'm pretty sure he was referring to you. And he said, why don't you, enjoy Kansas and enjoy your time here and good luck. And, go Jayhawks. And that was his way of saying, are you kidding me? Do you have any idea what you're saying right now? So that was my experience with the team and my first meeting with Coach Randall. And obviously I got to know him 20 years later down here in South Florida, and which was fantastic. But that's my embarrassing first introduction to Coach Randall at Kansas. What was your obviously you're at the other end of the spectrum. He's probably giving you a little more time of day than he's giving me.
Yeah. So I had one of my good friends, Kit Grove, who actually became Ross's assistant.
Yeah,
who
became coach.
Assistant, and he actually followed Coach Randall as the head coach at Kansas for a couple of years. He was a good friend of mine growing up, and he had transferred from New Mexico State to Kansas. You know, and he was definitely one of my, you know, kind of lead-ins to, you know, to getting noticed by Coach Randall a little bit more than I maybe already had been. So he had given me the heads up that, you know, basically, hey, as soon as the clock strikes, you know, midnight, July 3rd or whatever the date is, you know, when you can have that eligible phone call, you know, you're going to be getting a call from Coach Randall. So, I mean, I kind of knew it was coming, but it was definitely over the phone was the first time I ever got to talk to him. You know, he mentioned that he had been following what I'd been doing, was very interested in, you know, knowing more about my plans and what I was wanting to do. And if Kansas was ever going to be something that, you know, would interest me. And obviously it didn't take me very long to kind of let him know that I had already been leaning, you know, kind of that way. So we had we obviously had a good talk the first time. And, you know, I would say, I mean, it probably wasn't really within, you know, 3 to 4 more months, and I had gone down and, you know, taken in a Kansas basketball game.
And that was pretty much it, wasn't it?
And toured the campus and all that stuff. I mean, you go to Lawrence, Kansas, as you know, it's a really cool town just in general. You throw in the fact that, you know, the campus is, you know, just beautiful. It's all right there, you know. So when you go to the school, like you recognize that you're on a campus. I mean, I've been to some other schools where things are kind of spread out and sprawled around. But like when you go to the campus at Kansas, like, you know, you're on campus and everything that's there is a college building or a sorority or fraternity house or whatever it may be. But like, so that to me was really, really neat. You know, the beauty of it, the setting of everything. And then, yeah, of course you go to, you know, a basketball game at Allen Fieldhouse and not forget who was playing at the time, Rafa Brent, Paul Pierce, Jock.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're looking at, you know, what potentially, you know, one of the best college basketball teams that's ever been assembled. And you go watch a game inside Allen Fieldhouse and you're like, yeah, I kind of like this. And so, I mean, it really didn't take very long for, you know, all of those pieces to kind of come together. And, you know, just for me to decide like, hey, I don't really even need to deal with, you know, this recruiting thing anymore. I was pretty much ready to, you know, sign on the dotted line. So I made my decision really early. Obviously I don't regret it. I mean, I spent, you know, all 4 years, you know, going to school, became a nomad for a year right after college, you know, playing professional golf, and then actually moved back to Lawrence and lived there for 10 more years, you know, a year later. So it was definitely a place that I spent a lot of time in.
When you started, and you know, you have Coach Randall now, you know, there's a lot of different dynamics right now in college golf where, you know, a hotshot, you know, college player has his own swing coach, and the college coach doesn't mess with the swing. He's more of a, you know, tons of different responsibilities. They could be the swing coach. They could not be the coach. They could be the one that is maybe helping with course management, but not, you know, other things. You know, there's a lot of different hats probably that the college coach wears today as maybe opposed to back then. I'm just curious, how involved was Coach Randall with your maturation as a player? Did he become your swing coach? Did he, like, what was that relationship like? And, you know, how did he help you with your game?
Well, he never really became my swing coach, but he certainly was somebody that I could bounce stuff off. Like, hey, if I'm not doing well, I mean, what are you seeing type of thing. Let's not forget Coach Randall
played on tour.
Yeah, I mean, he was a tour player. You know, when he grew up in Northern California, he grew up, you know, alongside the likes of Johnny Miller and, you know, I think Ken Venturi. You know, I mean, there was some hot shots. He played, you know, college golf at San Jose State with Claude Harmon. I believe it was Claude Harmon. One of the Harmon brothers. You know, so he, you know, his pedigree as a player was, you know, off the charts. I mean, he finished second in the national championship to Hale Irwin, I'm fairly certain, as his team was winning the national championship. So, you know, as somebody who has been around professional golfers my entire life, being able to have somebody with a playing pedigree as good as his was really big, because I would trust what he would say. I mean, there's some guys that, they can talk the talk, but can they walk the walk? And, being somebody who's a good competitive player, I mean, I want you to be able to do both. And then that's going to help trust what you're telling me. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean the other guys aren't right, but when you look at a guy that's got that kind of a playing background, it just makes it that much easier, to kind of listen to what they're telling you. But I will say, where he didn't necessarily become my swing coach, he helped me a lot with stuff around the greens. Russ was an absolute magician with chipping and putting. And frankly, if he couldn't do that, he wouldn't have been in the player that he was, because he wasn't a very long hitter. He never, was going to wow you with the way he hit the ball. But he could get it up and down from anywhere. And I played numerous rounds of golf with him where in 9 holes he would have 10 putts. I mean, it was like the craziest thing you've ever seen. And it wasn't necessarily that he was knocking it in from 30 feet. He would chip it to literally inside 5 feet every single time. And, I tell this story to people all the time. He was probably the best bunker player that I've ever seen in person. And during junior camps, he would do, a clinic on the bunker shots. And he would always tell people that there's 4 levels to being a bunker player. And the first level is, let's just get the ball out of the sand.
Right.
Let's get it out of the sand and onto the grass somewhere. So he would kind of duff one out and just get it up out of the sand trap. And then he was like, okay, so once we become good enough to do that, now our expectation needs to be we're a level 2 player where we're out of the sand onto the green, anywhere on the green, just so that the next shot you hit is with your putter. He would knock it out just up onto the green. Okay, now once you're to here, now you can raise your level of expectation to the point where you can get it out on the green and somewhat close to the hole to where you might be able to make the putt. So then he'd hit a pretty good one up there, 4 or 5 feet away from the hole. And then he'd kind of laugh at you and he'd say, now, level 4 bunker player is when you can start looking at a sand shot like you're going to make it. And lo and behold, he would freaking make it almost every time. I mean, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. But, so he had lots of insight, for short game shots and stuff around the green that, I definitely listened to. And, not that I did everything exactly the way he did, because a lot of guys that, get that good kind of have their own way of doing things, and it may not necessarily work for everybody. But when you watch a guy do it and he succeeds with doing it, you're certainly going to try what he tells you. I was able to adapt, a lot of the stuff that he was talking about, into my short game. And it certainly helped me. But he was big time in that area. And then, certainly, course management, teaching you, how to play, how to deal with your emotions and stuff like that. And, again, he's an authority figure. So when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, how you take some of that information, sometimes you're like, God, I don't want to hear any of what he's telling me.
Right. This old guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. 3 hours, 6 hours, 3 days, whatever. Time may go by and you start thinking about it and you're like, man, I didn't like the way he was telling it to me then, but God, it makes a lot of sense, So, I mean, there was probably a lot of that stuff that went on,
so
where it was lessons that I kind of figured out, on down the road a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So let me jump in there, because I don't want to skip over this, but, I've seen Coach Randall give a lesson down here to, a 20 handicapper, and I would see him get kind of not frustrated, but like, he's like, I've been doing this for years and years, and like, here's what you need to do, and kind of point someone in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about being a college athlete under Coach Randall? Like, what were some of his things that he was adamant about that maybe, like you said, it took you a while to get, or something that you knew was going to drive him nuts that was like one of his core principles, whether it's like, don't short side yourself, or, club selection off the tee on a short par 4. Maybe what were some, give me, if you can, just give me like maybe one example of one of those hard lessons that you eventually adapted, but was hard to adapt right away.
A lot of it was, lines off the tee and lines into the greens, because he was adamant about like the short siding stuff. You do everything in your power to not short side yourself. You give yourself the most amount of room on your next shot. And the same thing off the tee. He was adamant about, some of the lines that you should take off the tees, and not necessarily the club that you should hit, but the lines that you should take, just so that you open up the fairways and give yourself the best chance, on your approach shots. And the thing that probably got to us the most, and when he wasn't around, when we would joke about it the most, was he wouldn't say it in a way that was, on the positive side. He wouldn't say like, hey, don't you guys think on this hole we should be trying to hit up the right side so that we open up the green to the left side? He was none of that whatsoever, which, psychologists would tell you that's the way you should talk about it, right? Because then it puts the emphasis on where you're trying to hit it. He would say, you absolutely cannot hit the ball left here. So it was totally the opposite of what any psychologist would tell you is, you absolutely can't hit the ball left here. And, so you kind of would have to brush it off because you're like, man, that's not the visual that I want.
Right. That's funny.
Everything you see is, there's out of bounds over there. Okay, yeah, no kidding, you don't want to hit over there, but that's all you're thinking about. That's all you're thinking about. So what happens is you tend to hit it over there. So in practice, you kind of go through those battles and you'd have to figure out how to, have it go in one ear and out the other. Well, I remember we were playing, and I'm fairly certain that I won the tournament. It's University of Colorado's tournament. They used to host it up in Northern California at a place called Stevenson Ranch. And we played there. I think we played there 3 times when I was in school. And I think I might have won it twice. I know for sure I won it one time, and it might have been this year, but I think it was the 10th hole. It was like a par 5, a little bit of a dogleg to the right. And there was there's kind of a creek sort of thing that runs down the left side, but there was something on the right side, if I remember right, that you had to kind of carry it too. So it was a little bit of an awkward, type of a shot. And I remember him saying, he wasn't certain that I could carry it on the line that I was going to take. So he chimes in and he says, well, you just can't miss it over there. You can't miss it over there. I remember full on double crossing it and hitting just an awful shot. And I turned around and I was like, would you just shut up? I couldn't get it out of my head, what he was saying that I couldn't do. But yeah, so that was probably the only time that we ever had any real friction on the golf course. But I just remember turning around because at the time I was playing some really good golf, and I didn't really want to hear it from anybody. And, it certainly, led to a really, really bad tee shot. And albeit it was just in a practice round, but
sure.
We probably had some dollars going on the line too, as amongst ourselves. So I'm sure it meant something other than just, hey, I get to reload another ball here and hit again. But, yeah, it was pretty funny, but that was probably the one thing about the way he talked about it. He was just very adamant about where not to hit the ball sometimes, as opposed to, hey, let's try to play it, this way, which, maybe is a better way to go about doing it. But, hey, it was effective because you definitely would listen to when he told it to you, because it would stick in your mind.
Yeah. Well, I believe the tournament you're talking about, you did win, and I pulled up the old Kansas Golf Media Guide and just kind of skimming through a couple things here. And career wins 7. That is a school record. And there's this guy in 2004, 2007, Gary Woodland. He only has 4. Do you ever remind him that he just is second place on that list, or does that whole PGA Tour career, U.S. Open champion, I guess you really can't go there, can you?
Yeah, I think there was probably a time where I maybe would have reminded him of that. But over the past couple of years, I think he's got plenty of ammunition to fire back with. So, I don't think I'm going to take it there anymore. It's just one of those things where I can say that, that's one of the records that has stood the test of time. I'm fairly certain my scoring record still stands as well, which, those are cool things to have. There's been a lot of years that have passed, and for nobody to, come through and break those, because we definitely had some good players at Kansas. And, Gary obviously, did well in his time at Kansas as a golfer, and he's gone on to do, extremely well, on the PGA Tour, and, look forward to him, probably doing some more of that stuff there in the near future. He's kind of got all the pieces.
He's got to get a PGA Championship to match your PGA Professional Championship.
Yeah, and honestly, the way those golf courses are set up,
that's him. Yeah,
he's on the short list of guys that can definitely get that. He's put himself, in the running the last couple of years. I mean, he's had good finishes the last 2 years in those events. So it's definitely something that he can pull off.
Yeah. Yeah, I just remember Coach Randall talking about some of the irons that Woodland would hit in college, where it was just 178, just hitting a smooth wedge, or just ridiculous stuff like that. That has to be just an interesting way to go through golf when you're hitting it that far.
Yeah, I remember being around Gary when that was kind of his thing.
Right.
I mean, he was able to do it. That was kind of his calling card. So he really tried to do it, and hit it long all the time and swing really hard. The thing that has been able to separate him from, other guys that, maybe don't mature and maybe don't figure it out is, he understands that, hey, that's just a weapon. I can go at it, at 80% effort and hit it longer than most guys. So I just kind of use that sixth gear, so to speak, when it, lends itself to it. I mean, I would say, like, if he tees off at the 17th and 18th hole at Kapalua, holes like that, where the conditions are such and the fairways are so big, he maybe will crack it up into sixth gear and, try to hit it 400 yards or whatever. But, I play practice rounds with him all the time at the PGAs, and, he doesn't embarrass me as much as he used to. I mean, he'll crank it up every once in a while and he'll pound one out there, and you're like, God, that's just gross.
That's just...
there's lots of holes where, I hit it, relatively close to the same distance that he does, but, I know full well that if he wants it, he can, hit it 30 to 40 past me and just make me eat crow in a heartbeat. So
yeah.
He's done, really, really well with, managing, that part of his game and having it be like it's legitimately a weapon for him now. It's not anything that's a hindrance to him.
Yeah. So you leave school, you graduate, 2-time All-American. You make the transition to play professionally. Played on Buy.com, it's Kornferry now, but it's had probably obviously the 37 names that tour has had, but Buy.com nationwide, played some events. It was brief, and then you said you moved back to Kansas. What? Tell me a little bit about your professional experience and maybe what. I mean, did you not enjoy the experience? Was it just literally a you weren't able to keep a card? Maybe talk about a little bit about your experiences coming out of college and then jumping onto the professional tour.
I was fortunate enough, to make it through to the finals of qualifying school. My first try doing it.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know if it was a blessing or if it was a bad thing. Whatever it was is what it was. It was a really awesome experience. I was coming off of being an All-American twice. I was winning tournaments at the college level. So obviously, for all intents and purposes, my golf game was ready to go to the next level and play at that level. My maturity, maybe not. And then I guess the other part was, you get out there and next thing you know, you're playing against guys that you've been watching on television. You're playing against guys that you've known about for a long, long time. And you start watching the way they go about doing things and you start going, wow, like his swing is way better than mine. And he does this, that, so, I mean, there was a certain amount of, all of a sudden I became, am I really good enough? Is my game really where it needs to be? So I think I probably didn't trust myself enough, that first year when I was out there playing. And because of that, I was probably trying to change things in my golf game, which obviously, if you look at the scores that I was shooting and the record that I had the previous years in college, like there was really no reason for me to be doing that stuff.
Right.
But for whatever reason, you just get out there and you see these guys who have been professional, for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're, doing it a certain way, and they make it look so easy and whatever. And I was just like, well, I don't think I'm there. And so I started trying to, kind of tinker it around. And I honestly, it's another conversation that I don't know why I remember it, but I guess maybe looking back on it, I probably do know why I remember it. But I was in Virginia Beach playing the tournament, and we were out, hanging out. This is probably like a Monday or a Tuesday night. And we were out having some drinks at the bar, and, I was hanging out with Jerry Foltz, who was working at the Golf Channel now, like he is now.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, my game. And I just was, he's asking me how things are going and how, and it's still pretty early in the year at that point. And I was, and I kind of had started to rattle off, these things that I felt like I needed to get better at. And he looked at me and he was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Why do you think you need to change all these things in your golf game?" I was like, I don't know. I just don't feel like I'm doing it good enough. But we talked for, whatever. It's not like it went on for hours and hours, but
Right.
we talked a little bit. But I still remember him looking at me and kind of laughing at me as I was telling him this stuff. And he's just like, "Why do you feel like you need to change?" So, whatever, I went through and had, a fantastic year, experiences that I, obviously had only dreamed of doing, and got to see the country, and back then the schedule was nice enough that you could actually drive in a car and do it. You didn't have to hop on an airplane all the time. So I got to drive all across the United States from coast to coast, which was really fun. Got to see and do a lot of things. But unfortunately my golf game, it just really wasn't there. And I had a couple of decent tournaments, and for the most part it was, disappointing on the golf course, but it was a great learning experience. And then, so I went back to Q school, made it through the first stage of qualifying, and then went to the second stage. And of course I missed by one shot. So one shot from getting to the finals, which at the time, if you got to finals, basically would have meant that you would have been able to play a fairly full schedule again on that tour, even as a conditional member, because the status, at that time was, it was a lot different than it is now. If you're a conditional member, you are still going to get into a lot of events.
Right. Now it's
So
completely different. I mean, now on the Kornferry Tour Q School, the only people that get full status are the two that win Q School. Yeah,
and if you don't finish in the top 40, like, you're probably not really guaranteed to get any starts.
Yeah.
So it's changed a lot. So that was, back then for me, that was really disappointing, to go through that and, feel like I kind of squandered a really, really good opportunity. But at the same time, hey, I mean, you live and you learn. You got to keep pushing forward. So obviously I wasn't done playing. I found a different route to go. So I started playing the mini tours, went down to Florida the next year and lived in, the Palm Beach area. Palms, and Chris Thompson and myself were down there. We played the Golden Bear Tour. Which at the time was great. The competition was great. The tour was great. Everything about it was nice. Being in the heat of Florida during the summertime wasn't necessarily awesome, but they were smart enough to play early in the day every day. So you're pretty much done by, 1, 2 o'clock, and you kind of get out of the heat. So we did that. And then again, went back to Q school the next year, and I think I made it to the second stage of the Q school again, and I either missed by 1 or I missed by 2 going to the finals. So, it was another heartbreak. And then after that is when my now wife, then girlfriend, had gotten the opportunity to be the merchandise buyer for Shadow Glen Country Club in Olathe.
Okay.
So that's when we moved back. So her and I, we had been dating for 2 years, I guess, at the time. And I was like, okay, well, if you're going to, get this job and, you know, be 20 minutes outside of Lawrence. I'm like, why don't we move to Lawrence and get a place in Lawrence? And, you know, I mean, I can do what I'm doing from anywhere.
Sure.
So we moved back to Lawrence, and that's what got us back there. And then from then on, I didn't ever go back and play the Golden Bear Tour again. And I'm not sure if it's because it went away or if I just decided I was going to do something a little bit different, but I started playing on, you know, other mini tours. So played a ton of years on the Adams Professional Golf Tour, which was called the Titan Tour at one time. You know, just a bunch of those events. I would go up to play, you know, a few events on the Dakotas Tour from time to time. You know, so I basically just kind of became that mini tour nomad where I would, you know, in the winter I would go play in Phoenix a couple times and then, you know, come back and hang out. And then I'd go start playing down south when the Tight Lies Tour and the Adams Tour got going. All with the intention of, you know, getting ready to go play Q school every year. You know, so I did it all the way until 2010. And in 2010, you know, we had started to have a family, and just was kind of at a point where, you know, I just needed to do something a little bit different. I mean, I had a run there early where I kept missing the finals by like one shot. And then I had about a 4-year run where, you know, I don't even know that I made it to the second stage of Q school, you know, so things got really frustrating.
Right.
Well, then in like 2008 or 2009, I actually won the first stage of the qualifying school. I was playing easily the best that I'd ever played at that point in time. I'd kind of gotten a few things figured out, and, you know, a big part of professional golf that a lot of people maybe don't figure out right away is, you know, it's still just golf, you know, and yes, at the end of the day, like, you're trying to win money and everything else. But if you think about it from the standpoint of winning money and if I'm going to make the cut, if I'm not going to make the cut, I mean, chances are you're not going to.
A recipe for disaster. When
you know, the recipe for disaster, you know, I mean, so like I distinctly remember, you know, always wondering what the cut was going to be. Well, and lo and behold, I would always be right around the cut number, you know. So it was never a situation where I played golf in a comfort zone. I was always nervous about, you know, the cut and the cut and the cut, because if you don't make the cut, you don't make any money. Well, it took me a couple of years, but I finally figured it out where if you don't think about it at all, just think about going and winning the golf tournament, you know, chances are now you're going to be on a different line. You know, how close to the lead are you as opposed to how close to the cut are you? So I started having some pretty nice success, and where I was playing, you know, really, really well. And I got to the point where I was like, hey, if I can get to where I want to get now, I feel like I'm ready to succeed. You know, and I won the first stage of the qualifying school. It was either 2008 or 2009. I can't remember for sure. And I went to the second stage again and was playing fantastic golf. I think I shot like 70, 66 the first 2 days and was tied. I think I was tied for the lead. And on the third round, I didn't really have my game, but I played decent enough to shoot even par and was still well within the number. And at the time, it was the top 20 in ties make it to the final stage. And I remember going out the last day, and I kind of the same thing. I was certainly nervous. I didn't have my best game. Got off kind of a rocky start, but then rallied, you know, and played fairly well at the end of the day, and I'm pretty sure I shot even par again. So I finished 8 under par, 72 holes. And I was, of course, just as I had been many, many times before, right around the number to qualify to go to the finals. And sat there for, I don't know, I mean, it was probably an hour or whatever. And of course, ended up finishing 21st, where 20 in ties qualify. So I finished 21st. I mean, I remember, you know, that night going back and looking at some of the stuff and, you know, what had happened and who finished ahead of me and what they did to finish their rounds and stuff. And I mean, it makes you want to cry even to this day, thinking about what some of the guys did the last few holes to beat the score that I had shot.
Right.
So that was really, really hard to take. And, you know, that was kind of the first time that I really thought, you know, okay, maybe I need to do something different for a while. so I think I probably played one more full year after that, but all the while I was playing that year, I was kind of thinking, what is potentially my next step going to be? Cause it had gotten to a point where I felt like it was Groundhog Day. I would play and I would feel as the year would go, I would be like, man, I'm playing good. Like my game is good. I'm having good finishes. I'm, doing all the things that would lead you to believe you're going in the right direction. Well, then you'd go to Q school and you'd get knocked down. It'd be like, oh, okay, well now I have to call my sponsors, see if I'm still going to be able to get money, see if I'm still going to be able to do this another year. I mean, so it's just like, it was a cycle that basically I had enough of it. I just was like, I feel like I'm succeeding, but I'm not. Like I'm not moving forward. I'm going right back to square one when I don't get through the Q school. So that basically, took its toll on me. And I just, decided to, go down a different road. I had always been very into instruction and how, people learn how to play the game. My dad being a PGA member kind of gave me some access again. I mean, going back to my dad and the access he gave me to start playing the game, I was able to talk to him and just kind of came up with a plan to use, his connections, my ability, his connections to kind of knock on a few doors to see what might be available to me if I moved back to Nebraska and got into the PGA of America, as a teaching pro. And as it turned out, I ended up coming back and I worked for him at the club that I grew up.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, I talked to a few other people, and they just weren't really sure. I mean, I basically cold called them and, just was the position that they weren't necessarily looking for. So as it turned out, my dad was just like, hey, let's just do this. Why don't you just come back, get into the program, start working towards getting your PGA certification and just come teach here. So that's what I did. I came back and we worked out a deal where, I was getting paid X amount. I was charging X for lessons and I was able to go play in the section events and earn, an extra money on the side. But it gave me a chance to at least change the route that I was going and get into the PGA of America. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So, well, that's a great, okay. So that provides us with really your timetable of how you transition from playing professionally to teaching professionally. So just by listening to that story and also notes that I have, or just information or thoughts that I'd had previously to our conversation, I wanted to ask you, so what was the hardest part of the transition? Because you go from spending basically, I mean, let's just call it 15 years, 5 years of, maybe junior golf, then 4 years of college, and then, 10 or so years of playing professionally. You go from 15 years of my relationship with golf is all about my game, my success, what I'm doing. And then you go into, okay, I need to spend time with, when people come up to me, they don't necessarily really care about my game. It's all about their game and how I can help them with their enjoyment with golf. How was that transition for you?
Well, I will say the fact that I went back to the club that I had grown up at, and where my dad had been the head pro director of golf for a lot of years, that certainly helped things because I went to a place of comfort. I went to a place where I knew people. If I was going to some place that it was just me and I didn't have a name, I didn't have any recognition, I didn't know any of the people, it probably would have been a little more difficult. But the familiarity with the surroundings and the familiarity with the people certainly helped. But it was, in a way, it was a little bit of humble pie.
Yeah.
Definitely trying to transition a little bit away from, the selfish side of, being a golf pro, trying to do everything for me, as to now I'm, I got to prioritize this a little differently. And, that has to kind of be secondary, which in the end has turned out to be probably the best thing for me. But at the time it was difficult, but it was time to do something different. So as tough as it was just something that I had to do.
So, I'm looking at, obviously there's so many, you mentioned the mini tours, the APT tour and the Golden Bear, and a lot of those tours still exist. So there's probably other avenues that are available for people that are trying to make it on the PGA Tour. You got to be laser focused to succeed out there. But can you talk about your process or maybe advice that you can give to some of these guys that are going to kind of follow the same path you did, play professionally, and then they're going to become a teaching pro? Maybe what's one thing you wish you did differently, or one thing that you wish you avoided?
I mean, I don't know that there's due to the, kind of some of the rules that would govern you as a PGA of America apprentice. I don't know that there's really anything, if you're still trying to play, I don't know that there's really you can do to, kind of lay that groundwork. I will say that the PGA of America has the PGA management program in colleges now. And there's a lot more of those than there were when I was, a student. I mean, if that was available to me at the University of Kansas, or let's just say if there was more universities that had that,
right,
I maybe would have looked to do that. Because, let's be honest. I mean, I knew that no matter whatever my life was going to entail, golf was going to be part of it, whether it was playing on the tour or at some point in time ending up, kind of following in my dad's footsteps. I knew for a long, long time that that's where I was going to be. So a UNO or a UNL, PGM program or whatever it may have been, certainly would have interested me because it would have gotten me that PGA membership, as my college degree. So if that's something that you kind of going into college, maybe look for, attending a school that has, that program, because man, you graduate and you're a PGA member. I mean, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I mean, probably the only thing that I regret, looking back on it, and there's other factors that kind of happened and little things along the way too. But once I became an apprentice, I mean, I rushed through the first part of it, in like a month and a half, because there was a tournament in Vegas that I wanted to be eligible to go play in when I was making my transition from Lawrence to Omaha. Right. So I busted my butt through the very first part of, the apprentice thing, just getting qualified to be in the program. And then once you get into the program, there's level 1, level 2, and level 3. And once you're done with level 3, you're through the whole thing. Well, they give you a 2-year window, to complete each level. And if you put your mind to it, and if you, knuckle down and do it, I mean, I honestly think you can do each level in 6 months. You can, if you go through it. I mean, you can, and that's saying that you can still work and do your other stuff on the side too. I mean, if you just plan for it and if you buckle down, I mean, I think you can complete it all, in that amount of time. So, I mean, that would mean you could go through the whole program in 18 months, maybe 2 years, tops. Well, of course it took me 6. Procrastination is kind of one of those things that, it's easy to do, and you get going on other things. And, I'm trying to build a clientele. I'm trying to learn how to become a better teacher. I'm trying to still play in some, all the section events and stuff like that. Well, for somebody like myself, who's competitive, being an apprentice only offers you so many chances to play. Once you become a Class A member of the PGA, all of a sudden the doors open to you way more on the competitive side, and now you can go play in the National Club Professional Championship, which I've played in 3 of them now, and I've finished 9th, I won, and I finished 8th. So all 3 of those finishes have got me into PGA Championships.
Right.
As a winner of that tournament, I got to play in 6 PGA Tour events this last year. So, I mean, getting to that level, where you are a full Class A member of the PGA, that's a huge, huge deal. So, I mean, if I had to do it all over again, taking 6 years, I would at least try to knock 2 years off of that and get it done a couple of years sooner. I mean, that's just one of those things that, that was always the thing that my dad and I talked about when I was making the transition. Cause it was like, I'm never going to lose competitive golf because I'm going to be able to play in the section events. There's still like a Nebraska Open, if you wanted to go play in a, Dakota Tour event, you could still go do that if you wanted to. But the PNC and all the other, the winter championships that you can go down to Florida and play in and those kinds of things as a full member of the PGA. That was kind of only the carrot at the end of the stick that I was trying to get to. And, I made it take too long. If I could have done it 2 years sooner, that would have been a nice thing.
I'm thinking to myself, you got this guy that plays competitively on that's knocking on the door at the final stage of Q school. When you're on the range, you're surrounded by some of the best players in the world, and then your next career is you're probably trying to help a 25 handicapper get a 9-iron airborne. I mean, do you remember maybe the first time you were on the range giving a lesson, thinking to yourself, what am I doing? I don't know how. I've never had to tell anyone how to get a wedge in the air. How do I do this?
I don't know that I remember any specifics, but I remembered, lots of different times where I would have to go through and, try to explain something that I could easily do, but explaining it, becomes different. So that's one of the things that I've gotten obviously a lot better at over the years is, communicating how things are done. But, the funniest thing about all of that is some of that discovery, as a teacher is what has helped me to become, a better player now than I ever was when I was playing all the time, because I've had to look at it, a different way. And I've had to kind of dive into like, okay, well, how do you actually do this as opposed to just going and doing it? So I've learned a lot about, myself and how I did things. I would say the biggest one would always be a bunker shot, like guys would always ask me, well, how far do you hit it? Where do you put it in your stance and whatever? And I'm like, God, I don't even know.
Right.
Like,
I just look at the ball, I dig my feet in and I go.
I just look at the hole. And so like people would ask me, I'm like, man, I think it's a really easy shot. But now that you ask me like how to do it, like, I'm not sure I know exactly how I do it. I just do it. So
yeah,
that's definitely been, a pretty eye-opening experience and definitely something that I can look back and say that helped me immensely to become a better player than I am or than I was then.
Interesting. So did you, and I guess you're talking about all these section events and state opens and all these, did you know about all the section events and competitive opportunities that a Class A had? And I'm not asking here, and I guess I also want to know, like, I'm not asking for personally, I don't need to see a 1099 or anything, but I mean, do you get a sense of how much PGA Class A's use section events to supplement their income? Is it hey, this is part of my job, this is how I make money? Or is it like, that's my day job, I'm at the club, and a handful of times a year I get to go play competitively, and if I bring home a couple bucks, hey, cool, I can do whatever with that. That's just,
Yep.
So can you talk about, I don't want to get too personal about how you look at it, but if you could just share, I'm just curious about that. I think other people would be too.
So I knew about all the pro-ams and all the section events, and I had looked to see how much money some guys were able to make doing it. So obviously comparing my game to their games, I was able to kind of decipher like, hey, I can still make a decent amount of money just kind of on the side of, and then have teaching, so I've got more than one source of income. So
yeah,
for myself, I will definitely say that and this is probably at some point going to change, but my game has been at a level, and it continues to be at a level where it's really good. So I can approach all of these competitive things in a way that it's a supplement to my income. I can count on making, a certain amount of money a year, in playing. There will be a time as I get older that, some of that probably will start to dwindle a little bit because, father time wins all the time. So, but personally, and I do know other players that are kind of in my same boat where that is definitely the way we look at it. And then there's also, a huge percentage of guys that, their day job is their job. Like that is priority number one, where I'm kind of juggling two things equally. There's other guys that, they've got their job at the club and that's priority number one. but then they also know that, hey, we can kind of go have some fun and we can kick some things around and, do, some events and maybe make a little extra money here and there, which will help pay for a vacation or, or whatever.
Exactly.
It's kind of a secondary thing. But yeah, I mean, I still look at it from the standpoint of, hey, if I can juggle the two things equally right now, I can have not one source of income, but two sources of income. And that's pretty cool.
Now, you mentioned earlier your success at the PNC, the Professional National Championship. 3 top 10s got you into 3 PGA Championships. I know you're going to be playing in the PGA Championship next year as well. At is it Bethpage? I can't remember.
Hopefully, I actually still have to qualify for it.
Oh,
so we'll play. Yeah, so we'll play the PNC in April, about 2 weeks ahead of the PGA Championship. So we'll play at Barton Creek down in Texas. Top 20 will qualify for the PGA Championship in San Francisco at Harding Park. So hopefully, obviously my goals are to be ready to play in April. And, we had 10 of us had a chance to be on the PGA Cup team 3 months ago.
Oh yeah. I have to ask you about Bob Soward's shot. So
we got, so that was a nice little preview. I mean, I had been to Barton Creek before, but it had been 20 years. So it was really cool to go back there and play the golf course, and especially to do it under, highly competitive, situation, so it's, I think the 10 of us that played there and had really good experience, we'll go into the PNC, liking our chances to, have a good week and qualify for the PGA Championship. Will all of us do it? Probably not, but I would say there's a good chance that some of us are going to do it.
Oh yeah. Well, when you did win the PNC in 2018, obviously it got you into the PGA Championship where you made the cut. And, you made the cut in a tournament that had the likes of Kisner, Leishman, and some guy named Tiger where they missed the cut. But I want to ask you, it got you 6 starts on the PGA Tour in 2019. Yep. And, I had Mike Small as a guest on the podcast in the past. He's a previous champion, and, we spoke a lot about, his Illini golf team. Yep. And we didn't dig into this as much, but I don't know if the casual golf fan really understands how this whole thing works where you get 6 PGA Tour starts. So can you talk a little bit about, do you choose the tournaments? Are they chosen for you in some regard? I mean, obviously you're not getting into, the invitationals like Memorial and the Arnold Palmer and the Masters, and I get that, but you played these 6 events and the PGA Championship. Can you talk a little bit about how that happens?
That's one of the things about, the PNC that, is really, really cool. It's the biggest field of golfers that you're probably ever going to see, 312 guys playing. And the perk at the end of it is, a pretty nice check, the honor of being the PGA professional champion. But then, you've got that extra thing out there on the end where you get to play in 6 PGA Tour events the following year. And that was, I played with Michael Block, who had won the tournament before the final day. And, that was one of the things that, kind of when we got done playing, he just said, hey, if you ever got any questions of how this stuff works, don't be afraid to call me, yada, yada. And there was multiple guys that kind of told me the same thing, like, hey, don't be afraid to reach out. But yeah, so you kind of go into it and you're not really sure exactly how it goes. Well, eventually you start getting some communications from the tour and stuff. And you get 6 starts. 3 of those starts have to be in tournaments that are opposite field events. So when they play like match play championship or opposite the British Open or whatever. So you get those opposite field tournaments. So 3 of the 6 are to be played in those tournaments. And if you wanted to play all opposite field events, you could. But just 3 of them for sure have to be. And then they give you a fairly sizable list of what I guess are called, open events outside of that. So, there's a lot of tournaments that are open events. And you can pick and choose from those. And I just kind of chose based on, I picked the opposite field events that I thought would be, the best tournaments and the, kind of the ones that fit into my, schedule as best as I could. And then outside of that, I kind of looked at the other ones as far as golf course,
right,
the type of conditions that you'd be playing, grass wise, Bermuda. I'm not a huge fan of Bermuda grass, so I tried to avoid that as much as I could. So that was kind of the way that I did it, but also being able to go play like at the John Deere, which is, close to home. And actually I spent 2 years of my life, living in the Quad Cities. So that was probably the first tournament that I really remember being a part of as a kid, going and watching. It wasn't at the same golf course, but it, the same tournament just a long time ago. So being able to go play in that was really cool. But yeah, that's just kind of the way I did it. But when you get a chance to, go from, the day-to-day, position that I'm at now, where I'm teaching and still playing and all that. And then next thing, basically I got to be a tour player last year. I mean, I got to
be an absolutely just, I mean, mentally it had to just been crazy. I can't even imagine that, where you're just like, all right, I'm just going to go moonlight over here in the PGA Tour.
Yeah, and when you think about, I got to play in 7 events since I played the PGA Championship as well, and really I got to play in 8 because I played in the or the Kornferry event here in Omaha as well.
Yeah.
So if you think about that, that's almost as many tournaments as Tiger Woods plays. And some of these big guys, they're playing 15, 18 events. I got to play almost as many events as they did.
I knew we'd get to a point in this interview where you would compare yourself to Tiger Woods. I just knew it. But yeah, that's awesome how you just found yourself. Now, which you made the cut down at the Punta Cana in I believe that's the Dominican, right? Is that the
Dominican Republic? Yep.
Yeah, and then made the cut the PGA. Missed the other cuts at like Valspar and Rocket Mortgage and all that stuff. But like, what we could talk probably for hours about the differences that you saw between last year compared to 2001 when you're playing by.com. But was there one takeaway that you had that was like, wow, I was surprised at this, or boy, I'm glad I'm going back to Omaha because this isn't for me? Or I guess I'm just like, what were your takeaways after spending a year on tour?
Well, it's everything you'd ever expect it to be. Let's put it that way. Okay. The way you're treated and the way you're taken care of, it's fantastic. And, as somebody who, is a club professional, doesn't do it, on a day-to-day basis, hasn't earned your way out there the way some of those other guys have, you look at it and you're like, well, I wonder how I'm going to be accepted out here.
I was just going to ask you that. Like, were they looking at like, who the hell's this guy?
Yeah. So there's a certain amount of that. I'm fortunate enough to, to go way back with a lot of these guys, and I played college golf, junior golf, and even professional golf with a lot of the guys that are out there playing now. So I know people, and I'm familiar with a lot of those guys as it is, which certainly helps. But I tell you, the one thing that I definitely will take away is I don't know that I was around anybody out there that wasn't really cool. They were awesome to be around. They didn't look down on me at all. And, they weren't ever like, well, what are you doing out here? It was the guys were great. It was really fun to, to get to be a part of that world for a while. The equipment manufacturers and the stuff that you get to do and the people you get to meet. It's fantastic. And every single one of those guys wanted me to use their stuff just as much as they wanted, another guy on tour to use it. I had multiple, shaft company people and stuff like that, where they were inquisitive as to what I was using, and, putter guys that would want me to try their stuff out. Cause they wanted, they treated me just like I was, any PGA Tour member. And that was really, really cool.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I'm thinking to myself, imagine if you're 20 dealing with all that distraction. You're 40, you're 40, 41, and you know that you're, this is a special treat in 2019 where it's not, your performance in these events is not dictated on your career, because you have your career in Nebraska. And I'm just thinking to myself, all these kids that are coming up on tour, and they're just all the equipment options and all this and all the attention, all the distractions. I can't imagine what that's like.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's really fun. It's cool to have all the options, and the way the equipment is now. There's something out there for everybody. There's no question about that. And there's probably 15 things that are exactly the same. They just are painted different and look a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that it's pretty easy to trust what you have, because of the the TrackMans and the GC quads and all the different testing devices that you can put yourself on. I mean, so it makes the decisions a lot easier. You're not just hitting shots and trying to take a guess at it. I mean, everything has an answer at the end of the day. So if you know what you're looking for, you can find it, which is nice. And like I said, it's like a kid in a candy store. If there's something that you think you need, they're certainly going to help you find it. And they're more than willing to do it. So it's fantastic.
It's probably a hard question for you to answer, or maybe it's not. But if in that entire experience in 2019, maybe who is one person or one practice round or one pairing that you can look back and say, man, I can't believe how lucky I am I got to experience that. I hope I can get back and do that again.
Well, I mean, I got a couple of them and they both go back to just nostalgic stuff. I mean, Chris Thompson, who was a teammate of mine at Kansas, had qualified for the tour and was a rookie on tour last year. So, for he and I, we had beat our head against the wall for years and years and years together, and we had kind of done the same thing. I just happened to stop beating my head against the wall, and he continued to do it. Well, it worked out for him, and he was able to, get a PGA Tour card last year. And so while I was able to go play in events, he was a rookie on tour. So we got to share the experience together, which, I mean, 20 years ago, we thought we'd be doing it. And, it just took us a lot longer to do it. But we got to play a lot of practice rounds together and got to hang out and, kind of be a part of it. Neither one of us performed as well as we would have wanted to, but we got to do it, so that was, those experiences were really cool. But, probably the coolest was at the PGA Championship at Bethpage. Tyler Hall, who is a club professional also, who got the last spot in the tournament through the PNC and playoff. I think he went 4 holes of a playoff maybe in South Carolina to get the last spot in the PGA. And he is also a Kansas grad. He kind of came into Kansas when I was leaving Kansas, and he was leaving kind of as Gary was coming in. There was a little bit of overlap all the way around, but it was 3 of us that were kind of, we never really played fully together, but we were kind of right on the fringes of each other at Kansas.
Right.
And, so we went out, and the 3 of us played a practice round at Bethpage, which, I don't know that there's ever been 3 Jayhawks in the same major championship at one time. That probably that in itself is a record. And we got to experience it and play a practice round together, and we had a great time. The weather wasn't awesome, but it was just an awesome time to be out there and, to do it together, and to obviously pick Gary's brain and kind of go through the practice round process that he goes through. And, I've done it with him quite a few times, but you're always going to learn something, seeing where they think the pins are going to be, and, their knowledge of how the course gets set up and stuff like that. I mean, we got to learn a lot, and I don't know that that'll, ever really be topped. But, and I will say, and again, going back to Gary and how, genuine of a guy he is. I mean, we texted, later on that night afterwards, and I don't think he says stuff like this just to say it, but he said, that was honestly the best practice round I've ever had on the PGA Tour. It was so much fun to be able to do that. So that's pretty cool coming from a guy like that. And I mean, obviously I felt the same way. I'm like, here we are, three guys that played golf at the University of Kansas, and we're, getting ready to tee off in a major championship in a couple of days, and we got to play a practice round together. I mean, it was really cool.
That's awesome. So I mean, I really appreciate all this great insight, this great time that you've been providing us. And I know the listeners are going to love this episode. I want to ask you, before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit about what your plans are for 2020. But one of the cool things is, first of all, I love team format golf. I was at the Walker Cup last year, Ryder Cup. We just wrapped up this amazing comeback at the President's Cup. But the PGA Cup is something that maybe listeners aren't fully aware of, and it's obviously team format. Professional, teaching professionals for PGA of America against golf professionals represented by the GB&I golf professionals. So this was, as you mentioned, is at Barton Creek in Austin. Incredible comeback that the U.S. team had. This is your first time playing the PGA Cup, wasn't it?
Yeah. And, honestly, again, you're talking about a sport which typically is a pretty selfish thing. You do things for yourself and you do things trying to beat everybody else.
Sure.
You don't do it in a team format very often, but having the chance to do it, and honestly, I shouldn't even forget to say this, but that's, if I do regret anything in my life as far as a golfer, the one thing that I maybe do regret is my senior year of college, I was chosen to play on the Palmer Cup team, which Coach Randall was the captain of. And I declined to do it because I was really excited to become a professional golfer and didn't want to wait 3 months to do it. So, as a 21-year-old, you don't really think a whole lot of a decision like that. I mean, it wasn't that difficult of a decision for me to make, but 20 years down the road, now I look at it and I'm like, God, what an idiot. How cool of an experience that have been. And to do it with my college coach as the captain, would have made it even cooler. But, that being aside, I hadn't ever got to play in any event, quite like this. So I was really excited going in. Obviously, I know the guys that were on the team. When you get there, though, I mean, it blows out your expectations. I mean, everything about it was bigger, better, and cooler than you could even dream of it being. Well, and of course, we go down there and we play, and, I mean, I think we all played, pretty good golf. The GB&I team was fantastic. I mean, I think they would probably say it's the best team that they've ever had. And I feel like we put the best team that we could have, out there ourselves. But, we were kind of hanging in there the first day. We, won some matches and it was pretty tight. And then the second day rolls around and they just absolutely drummed us. And then, I mean, it was like a bloodbath out there. And all of a sudden, you're kind of sitting there going, well, I'm not sure there's any way we can win this thing. Well, of course, we have a talk about it in the team room and everybody kind of says their piece. And, I think the consensus was that, none of us played poorly. We just got beat by guys that played better that day. So, I mean, that being said, we all knew that if we, put our heads down, went out there with a goal in mind to win our matches, that, it wasn't over. And the way the final day, wrapped up was just unbelievable. I mean, it literally, the momentum of the whole thing, you could kind of see it changing if you watch the boards as you were going around the course. But I mean, there was a lot of red up there. But the whole thing, I mean, I would say there was a 10 to 15 minute stretch that the whole thing just totally turned over. And all of a sudden it was like, we probably aren't going to win to like, we are going to win. And it was the fastest turnaround and the most emotional thing. I mean, it was crazy. And it all started off when Bob Sowards, holes out this unbelievable chip on the 18th hole for eagle.
Were you there? Were you still on the course, or did you see
it? I was still playing. So, I mean, I got to see the replay of it and whatnot, and that was the thing that was so nuts. I mean, I knew that he was in a tight match. I knew that Ben Kern, who was playing right behind him, was in a tight match, but they were both looking like they were going to, if not win, they were going to at least have and get something out of the deal, which was very important as well. And then I think there was maybe one or two matches kind of in between us. But as it turned out, I mean, Bob makes his chip shot, he wins. And I think 30 to 45 seconds after that, Ben Kern made a putt on the 17th hole to win his match. And then I think I won my match because I won 5 and 4. So I got done quite early. But I think literally within 5 minutes, all three of us had won our matches. And the guy right behind me, Ben Cook, was like one hole away from winning his match. So, I mean, it was just crazy how fast it all turned around. And it's something that you can't really describe, but you got guys who have headsets on and they're giving you updates and stuff like that. So it was remarkable. And then, the fact that we were in Austin, Texas, where Ben Crenshaw is from, he had come to talk to us, at a team dinner the first night we were there. And then you start going back to Brookline in 1999 and the comeback that the Ryder Cup team had. I mean, the deficit was the same.
Yeah.
The score on the scoreboard was the exact same. The only difference was they played 12 matches. We only have 10. So our margin for error was really small. But we were able to do it. And I mean, just the ironic part of it and how it all played out was almost spooky in a way. But yeah, it was really, really fun. And, something that I definitely have pinned on the calendar to try to make that team again in 2 years, because it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had in golf.
Well, you're talking about that's incredible. Yeah, I remember seeing that shot by Sowers, and I was like, "You got to be kidding me!" I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. You're set up for a great 2020. You mentioned that you got the PNC coming up. You're going to try and qualify for that for the PGA Championship. Gosh, I hope we could do this again soon. And thanks so much for your time today. This is fantastic information and just great hearing your story. And thanks for stopping by the back of the range.
You bet. Thank you very much for having me.
And there you have it. Special thanks to Ryan Vermeer for joining us this week at the back of the range. All the best to him in 2020. I know he's looking for a berth in that PGA Championship. I'm sure there's got to be a practice round in store for him with Gary Woodland should he get there. So all the best to him. Don't forget, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are on social media. If you want to listen to any of the previous episodes, go to thebackoftherange.com. Leave a review in Apple Podcast. We'll see you again next week for another episode here at the Back of the Range.